everybody, I'm Kate Cass, and welcome to an edition of Let's Talk About, and welcome to the latest installment of To Infinity War and Beyond. While Phase 4 focused mostly on the more recently established heroes, this next entry shows us that some of the classics are still kicking in Thor Love and Thunder. Thor is back in shape and ready to be heroic again, which is good because there's a new threat on the horizon, Gorr the God Killer, played by Christian Bale.
You either die a hero, or you live long enough.
Yeah, we've already used that clip before, we're not using it again. When this mission threatens the future of the remaining Asgardians, Thor's quest to save them leads to an unexpected reunion.
Hey.
Shine!
Thor Love and Thunder is unique in that it breaks a pretty firm tradition in the MCU. Aside from the Avengers movies, this is the first franchise in the cinematic universe to get a fourth installment. Personally, I always kind of like this unwritten rule because it showed a level of restraint from Marvel to not beat their individual franchises into the ground with never-ending sequels. Was it worth it for Thor of all heroes to break the mold? Look, let's be honest, there's only one reason this movie exists. Because of Ragnarok. Taika Waititi strutted into Marvel Studios, grabbed the Thor franchise, put it through a signature lens, and people loved it. Thor Ragnarok is the most beloved installment in one of Marvel's least loved franchises. So this movie had a lot to live up to. Not just as a sequel to Ragnarok, but as a successor to the events of Endgame. And to their credit, they tried their best at being a good blend of both. Strange decisions to name an ice cream parlor after a near-apocalyptic event in your universe aside, I really enjoyed the way this movie follows up on the events of Phase 3. I really like the evolution of New Asgard. Seeing Asgardian culture and technology be rebuilt in this little seaside town in Norway is a part of world building I find very charming. Plus, the stage plays from Ragnarok are back, so that's a win right there.
Should we start working on a performance of this entire debacle? See, people need entertainment.
So, the Asgardian plays are performed by the writers? That explains a lot. Also, Matt Damon doing the Asgardian accent? Yes, just yes. Even more fascinating and exciting is that New Asgard is apparently not just a home for Asgardian refugees, but other alien species as well. Remember this, I'll have a tangent about it in a future MCU TV review. Another fun follow-up is getting a look at Thor's time traveling with the Guardians of the Galaxy. It kinda makes me wish that he got to be in Guardians 3 and then we did Thor Love and Thunder, but I do appreciate that we get this little bit of time with the Guardians instead of them dropping him off somewhere without a word. It makes it feel like he was a proper member of the team, which is really nice. Also, I love Thor's Ravager look. It's somehow both out of place and very fitting for him. Thor is in an interesting place in this movie. He gets his act back together somewhat after the events of Endgame, but he's fallen back into his old ways a bit, meaning he's kind of a destructive show-off. While he seems to be trying to build himself back up after how hard he fell during the 5-year gap, it's clear he's racing into fight after fight after fight for a sense of purpose or to fill a void. No matter how much he tries, Thor still feels directionless. So he decides to go in the easiest direction, which is towards the next fight. But what would a potentially world-ending superhero battle be without obstacles that force you to confront your personal issues? Thor gets that on both sides with his allies and his enemy for this film. But let's talk about his reluctant reunion with Jane Foster. This was easily the biggest selling point of the film. Or the biggest problem, depending on what messed up corner of Twitter you wound up in. Natalie Portman famously was one of the few actors to depart from the MCU, potentially due to neglect with her character in Thor the Dark World. So it was a surprise to not only see her back, but to have her catch up with her comic counterpart and become the mighty Thor. I'm very glad Jane is back. Her utilization in the films admittedly hasn't always been the best, especially considering that in Dark World she was basically a living MacGuffin, but I always liked Jane as a character and her relationship with Thor. I think that connection was more important to his growth than most give it credit for, and Hemsworth and Portman just have nice chemistry. It's really great after that off-screen breakup to get some more context about what happened between them, seeing how they were both just distant from each other, either through dedicating themselves to other commitments or out of fear of losing each other, with that very fear and distance being the thing that ultimately ends things between them. It's believable for sure. After how unceremoniously their relationship ended, it was great to get this sense of closure and maybe a way to give them a second chance. But it's not going to be easy. There's still some baggage between them, and a lot has happened in both of their lives since they parted ways. Plus the fact that Mjolnir is back and is now Jane's weapon makes things even more awkward for Thor. On that note, everything about Mjolnir's return is pretty fantastic. The heel turn reunion, the first shot of Jane wielding it, the fact that it can scatter in pieces and reassemble itself due to it now being fragmented, it doesn't feel cheap, it feels earned, and it's all really cool. It's those kinds of details that make it feel a little less awkward that there are technically two Thors in this movie. Jane is wielding Thor's power, but has different methods to handle threats. She can't summon the Bifrost quite right, but she uses her astrophysicist knowledge to help them solve problems. She gets too enthusiastic about choosing a catchphrase, but is all business when people are in danger. It's a good blend of traits for someone who has never had superpowers before, but has the potential and desire to be a great superhero. She also develops this nice friendship with Valkyrie.
Know exactly what team we're on, okay?
Team Jane.
Well, there's a ship born in real time. Valkyrie is, in my opinion, underused in this movie. She's not bad or anything. She handles the role of king well, even when things get overwhelming. She charges into battle in her casual look, which I absolutely love, and she's more emotionally available for Thor, Jane, and even Korg. But she doesn't really have an arc of her own. She's mostly there for support, which again isn't bad, but if you're a Valkyrie superfan, you might be disappointed. Especially when she's benched for the final fight, which really bothered me. Like, I get why they did it, but still, it's a shame. But hey, at least her confirmed off-screen bisexuality gets a passing mention.
Is that because you lost your girlfriend in battle and never forgave yourself?
That's nice. But you know what isn't nice, or at least not as nice as it usually is? The production design. Now, before anyone makes any assumptions, this is not a dig at the visual effects. For the most part, they work perfectly well. Not as refined as previous movies, I will admit, but still, they get across what they need to just fine. The color grading especially is just as eye-popping, if not more so, than it was in Ragnarok. Every location on this space-trotting adventure is distinct and eye-catching with the lighting design and backdrops. I particularly like the black and white tone of the Shadow Realm with the occasional color pop. Very cool, very Sin City. Honestly, the only critique I'd have with the effects is the villain's minions. Oh goody, a horde of shadowy, indistinguishable foot soldiers, my actual least favorite. No, where the production design is lacking to me is the costumes. What happened here? Up until now, the Thor movies have done an exceptional job at translating ridiculous space Viking outfits conceived for comics in the 1970s into something that looks regal and battle-ready, like they've been lived in for many years of distinguished honor. Here though, most of them just look cheap. I don't mind Thor's armor being more colorful now. It makes sense as a blend of his old outfits and his more casual ones like on Sakaar and with the Guardians. But the platings look like they're plastic that would snap if he swung his axe a bit too hard. And Zeus here looks like he was strapped into some store-bought armor plating that's one size too big. Valkyrie and Jane get by pretty scot-free. They look pretty good and they somehow made that helmet work in live action, but apart from that, it is really a downgrade from what came before. When I first talked about Thor, I remember how impressed I was that these designs didn't look like Halloween costumes. But now we seem to have reached Halloween costume quality, and while I might be in the minority here, it might be the most disappointing thing about the movie to me. The only thing that rivals it is... Okay, let's talk about gore. First off, y'all owe Malekith an apology. Right now. And yes, I will elaborate, but let's go over the pros before that, because Gorr's character has some really strong bones. The destruction of Gorr's faith in the gods after the death of all of his people, including his daughter, does offer sympathy for the character before he becomes the main villain. I really appreciate that a movie that is branded as so loud and fun has such a quiet and desolate opening sequence. Not to mention Christian Bale is doing a really good job in an unrecognizable role. It's a really powerful origin across the board. However, if there was one way to describe Gorr, it would be that he peaked early. He's set up as the God Killer, wielding a weapon that strikes fear into immortal beings of immeasurable power, but actually portraying that power on screen never quite delivers. None of the other gods apart from Thor take his threat seriously, and whenever he does slay a god, apart from the first time, we don't get to see it. Look at this giant titan of a god he slayed. Imagine what a display of power it would have been to see him do that with a little effort. You have to imagine it because they don't show us. All we get is a warning from a cameo by Sif. Sure, it's cool to see her again and do literally nothing the rest of the film. I can only imagine what her reaction was when she realized that. The lack of showcasing Gore's power really does undermine the threat he supposedly poses. Heck, most of the time, the weird Shadow Army does his work. The closest we get is his confrontation with Thor and the gang at the end of the second act, which, to its credit, is really intense and claustrophobic. You really get the sense that he's only sparing them as long as he is to get what he wants from them. It works. But with only 20 minutes left by the time that confrontation ends, it felt kind of too little too late. You can say what you want about Malekith, but it was clear right away he was a dangerous force to be reckoned with, demonstrating just how far he'd go to achieve his goal, and the empathy he lacked only strengthens those acts because you knew that with the right amount of power, there was nothing he was incapable of destroying. Gore is certainly a character with more dimension than Malekith, but the lack of antipathy and displays of pure power during his time corrupted by the Necrosword really hurt his credibility as a villain, at least in my opinion. As underwhelming as Gore's role in the film is, though, it comes to a satisfying enough conclusion when he realizes that his goal has been his own grief and betrayal clouding what he really wanted. Again, it's good stuff and a tried and true aha moment, but I don't know, it doesn't hit home as well as it should. I feel like there should have been a moment of realization, of Gore maybe seeing Thor in a new light before eventually trusting him. The skeleton for an amazing villain and overall character are there for Gore for sure, but it never quite assembles into a strong enough structure. Okay, so there's a lot of hits and a lot of misses in Thor Love and Thunder. It's a very mixed bag of a movie. Maybe the most mixed bag in the MCU since the first Thor movie. But if you ask me, there is one thing that unquestionably works really well in this movie. The title hero. Thor has had a very, very, very interesting journey throughout his time in the cinematic universe. I can't think of another hero in the franchise that has gone through as much change as he has. Which is what made it hard for me to nail down just what the theme of the Thor franchise and Thor's arc really was. Not only did he feel like he was going in a different direction every other movie, but the constant change in directors and tone played a part in those changes as well. But with Love and Thunder, I realized that, whether intentional or not, most likely not, that constant change in direction is thematic to Thor's hero's journey. If I were to describe it in one word, as I try to do, it would probably be expectations. There's no doubt that superheroes are held to high and specific standards, and pretty much every position Thor has held in his time in the MCU has come with those same kind of high expectations. To act a certain way, to be a certain kind of person, to be an example for millions upon millions of people, while at the same time just figuring out who he is. Thor has had many titles, of Prince, of Hero, of Avenger, of King, of Ravager, of God. He's been all these things, but none of them define him. They are just parts of his long, long journey. But at the end of the day, he's just Thor, a man taking on many titles, but still just a man underneath it all. Love and Thunder acknowledges right from the start that through all those changes, Thor's lost basically everything at this point. Outside of a couple of friends, he's on his own with no real direction, possibly for the first time ever.
After thousands of years of living, you don't seem to know who the hell you are.
Wow. I didn't think Peter Quill, of all people, would be the one to hit the nail on the head like that. This identity crisis only gets more exacerbated when he reunites with Jane, flying around in his look with his hammer and using his name. I'm not saying she doesn't deserve those things, but it's not helping this whole figuring out who he is situation, when he's desperately clinging on to the few parts of his identity he can always fall back on. Right now, all he has is being Thor, which for many just means being the heroic god of thunder. For someone who is expected to be a role model and protector for everyone around them, focusing on yourself and your well-being can feel like less of a priority. Because of everything that's happened and how much he's lost, Thor puts any personal grief aside and closes himself off to focus on that. Which, yeah, gets tough to do when your ex-girlfriend is flying around with your ex-weapon. But while Thor is still very directionless and very hurt, this movie also does display how much he's grown, mainly with how he deals with the threat of Gore and how it differs from how the other gods handle it. For one, he takes this threat seriously immediately. Thor's time as a hero has shown him to never underestimate the other side, no matter how powerful you think you are. It also made him more sympathetic for what other gods might consider lesser beings, because the Thor, they're wonderful beings capable of so much. They're friends, they're family, not subjects or subordinates. Meanwhile, Zeus, played by Russell Crowe, and the the other gods don't think this is their problem. By the way, I'm not much of a Russell Crowe fan to begin with, and
You be quiet, because you are this close to being uninvited to the orgy.
yeah, this isn't helping. Thor seems to have an empathy and sense of duty that his fellow gods lack. Once Zeus learns of something that can threaten his immortality, he hides away instead of doing something about it. Thor has been ready to lose everything in battle, and has watched those far less powerful than gods lay down their lives to protect the innocent. It instilled virtues in him that the other gods don't have or feel they don't need. Honestly, the trip to Omnipotent City can feel pretty pointless on a story level because the group doesn't really gain much of anything from it, but it's an important moment to show how much Thor differs from his fellow gods. He may feel lost, but he has grown. He may be alone, but he hasn't always been. Those connections were fundamental to shaping Thor into the person he is now. Someone who will pass on this great power he has instead of wielding it for himself. Sharing this adventure with Jane even gets him to open his heart up again. The most powerful moment in the movie is when Thor decides that he wants to embrace love and connections again after isolating himself for so long. When Jane tells him the truth, that she's dying of cancer, instead of shutting himself out again or running away, he's there to comfort her, assure her that this is a power that chose her, and that no matter how long they have, they're gonna make the most of all that time together. But there's a big difference between saying something and doing it. While Thor won't shut Jane out, he will be protective of her, and Jane is in a place right now where she's taking every chance she can to take control of her life in the middle of dealing with something that is uncontrollable. Remember, this movie is called Thor Love and Thunder. That title doesn't just apply to Thor, Odin's son. By the time we get to the final battle, it's clear that this movie is just as much the story of Jane Foster, the mighty Thor. This isn't like the other movies Jane has been in, where she's there basically to serve as a part of Thor's character arc rather than have her own. In fact, Love and Thunder actively fights against this idea. While Thor does make Mjolnir promise to protect Jane, the choice to wield that power is still hers. In a way, Jane is doing what Thor's been doing for a while now, dedicating herself to being the best hero she can be to distract from tougher, more personal problems. She seeks out Mjolnir in the first place in the hopes that its power can help stave off her cancer, when in reality, when that power goes away, that grief and illness will still be there underneath. It's a band-aid, not a stitch. In fact, it's weakening Jane's body enough that it can't fight the cancer. If Jane fights against Gore one more time, it will kill her. And as easy as it would be to have Jane respect Thor's wishes and stay alive as long as she can for his sake, Jane decides to do what Thor said, even against his wishes, to make the most of the time she has, even if it means shortening that time. It might seem like an obvious choice, but it's still a really impactful one. I got this weird mix of excitement by that epic superhero entrance she has, but feeling that drop in my stomach when it cuts back to Thor as he realizes the choice she's made. It's honestly really great. This final battle may make up for all the agency Jane lacked in Dark World. I was kind of surprised though that they went ahead with killing Jane off after all of that. But as much as I do wish the mighty Thor was about to get a trilogy all her own, I commend them for making a more bold choice. It doesn't feel cheap, it doesn't feel like a female character getting killed off for a superficial reason, it feels like a heroic sacrifice. Thor and Jane's relationship in this movie started with neither of them being willing to fully commit to each other out of their own fears. But now, when those fears become their reality, they look each other in the eye and are there for each other until the end. With her last moments, Jane does something for Thor. He may have to grieve for yet another lost loved one, but he'll have someone else to love and care for. To prove to Gore that there are gods who do care, he gets another chance at having a family, looking after Gore's daughter. It's a really nice idea, giving this bombastic, larger-than-life figure a more domestic and wholesome epilogue. It is Thor taking on yet another important title, this time as a father figure, but it seems to be one he embraces wholeheartedly. As these two aliens, now alone in the universe, build a new life together. Thor racing into battle with a little girl wielding Stormbreaker might be my new favorite closing shot of a Marvel movie. Overall, I think the best way to sum up Thor Love and Thunder is that it's an okay movie with a really bad rep. There are some really strong moments, the themes and character arcs are there, and it's still generally a good time, it's just not as good as Ragnarok. I think that might be what caused the backlash. People wanted this to be great, but were very disappointed when it was just pretty good. Is that invalid? Not necessarily. There were things that really disappointed me about this movie too. It can be a bit too silly at times, some of Thor's signature aesthetic gets a significant downgrade here, the supporting cast is a bit superfluous, and Gore might be the MCU villain with the most wasted potential. It had a lot of amazing ideas, but they could have been a lot stronger if they were more focused and tied together better. Plus, it's just really weird to have a Thor movie without Loki in it. I get why he's not there, but something about it just feels off, you know? But you know me, I'm an apologist, and if a movie does enough right, I tend to be way more forgiving than most. Luckily, what Thor Love and Thunder gets right, it gets really right, primarily with our two thunder gods. I loved everything involving Thor and Jane in this movie. It was the one thing they absolutely had to get right, and as far as I'm concerned, they succeeded. They deliver a lot of exciting action. Chris Hemsworth and Natalie Portman step back into these roles as if only a year has passed and not 9 since they last shared the screen together, and it exemplifies both their strengths and flaws as a couple and as individuals, creating a journey for the two of them I was completely invested in until the very end. If anything, Love and Thunder kind of proves how much of an unlikely success Ragnarok was. Like I said at the beginning, Thor was hardly Marvel's most beloved or successful franchise. To be brutally honest, this is pretty on par with the first two movies. It's kind of an anomaly that this sequel exists at all, or that there may even be plans to do more. There is a lot of sequel bait in this movie. For the fourth installment of franchise, that's pretty gutsy. Despite the lukewarm reception to the film, there will likely be a future for Thor in the MCU as long as Hemsworth is willing to stick around, and I'd honestly be really curious to see where they could take things from here. It did prove that Ragnarok was more the exception, not the new standard, but if Thor has persisted for this long, I'm sure there's plenty of exciting places to go from here. Thanks for watching, everyone. Definitely let me know what you thought of this movie in the comments below. That's why the series is called Let's Talk About. I want to give a very special thanks to my patrons who help support my content, including Chelsea A. Crandall, David L. Sproul, Hawk Hero, Jinx Productions, and Wait in the Wings. If you'd like to join these fine people in supporting my content while getting cool exclusive perks, you can check out my Patreon page at the link in the description, as well as my other social media if you'd like to check out any of those. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you guys next time.
Do you understand me, Hercules? Do you understand me, my son?
Fuck no!